The town had the look of a place that had forgotten how to be young. Sun-blanched signs, a church bell with a crack down its side, corral rails silvered by wind, and a hill that held its breath for the dead. People said Gallows Notch had once been loud with cattle and fiddle music, that the creek had rushed clear and laughing. These days the water moved like an old man, and trouble rode in with the wind, sometimes so soft you mistook it for dust until it reached your teeth. Vesper Quade rode in on a mule, because a mule would forgive the distances men would not. She kept to the road's ragged edge, where sage brushed her boot heel and the hardpan trembled with heat. The mule had a stubborn streak, like anyone who made it this far. Vesper did not mind. Stubbornness had kept her heart beating in places where somebody else's hands tried to make it stop. She did not look like a girl who'd been favored by luck. She wore a man's jacket 2 owners too late, and a skirt cut to calf because Miles and Briars had opinions about hems. Her hair had the color of rye at sundown. It kinked and refused the orderly. A lark's feather was stitched into her collar with 3 quick, uneven stitches. If anyone noticed that detail, they never asked why. People in forgotten towns stopped asking why. It made their days easier and their nights less honest. Vesper sang when she thought no one was listening. Not the kind of song you play on a porch to coax neighbors to bring peach pie, and not a church hymn either. It was a narrow thing, threaded low in her chest, a way to stack her breathing into something that didn't rattle her ribs. She shaped the notes like river stones in a palm. Sometimes the notes pushed back. When the town's first shack came into view, a farrier's lean-to with a water barrel half collapsed beside it, she checked the hill. Wind rubbed the grass thin around a fence up there, and a cottonwood lifted one arm as if swearing an oath. A white marker stood clean as bone against the afternoon sky. You could tell the grave had been kept. Somebody loved the dead enough to bring water and cut weeds. Vesper's mouth went dry. She tasted iron the way you do before a nosebleed. "Don't stop," she told the mule. "We'll drink after." They did not stop. Vesper passed men who paused and hammering, women whose eyes narrowed then softened when they reached the cut on Vesper's lip and the deepening bruise along her jaw. No one asked after it. No one offered a cloth. Folks in Gallows Notch had learned not to spend themselves on the passing broken, not when their own roofs leaked. At the well in the square, she took the rope gently from an old woman's hands and hauled fresh water for both of them. The old woman watched her, not unkindly. "Hot day to be new," she said. "Some days won't let you be anything else," Vesper answered. "You got a name?" "Vesper." She did not add Quade. Names made lines. People used them to pull things out of you. The old woman nodded like the answer was fine as any. "If you're trading, the mercantile's open. If you're praying, the bell's been stuck at half hope all week, but the Lord hears low. If you're looking for a fight, take it across the line. Sheriff says he's tired of mopins." "I'm not looking for a fight." "Good. It'll find you if it wants you." The old woman turned her eyes toward the hill without moving her head. "It likes to start up there." Vesper swallowed. "Who's on it?" Her name was Lowen Hart. Some say she was never sick a day in her life until the day she died. The hill keeps her in view so her husband don't forget to behave. The old woman's mouth curved. "Gideon Hart owns the big spread east, keeps his fences straight and his grief straighter." "Who else keeps the grave?" Vesper asked. She tried to make her voice casual. It came out like a boot on loose gravel. "A girl. Comes sometimes. Wears a man's hat like you." The old woman narrowed her eyes. "You're not her." "No, but I need to meet him." "Men get meaner when the ground's part of the conversation. Best to come at a man sideways, not up that hill." Vesper touched 2 fingers to the brim of a hat she didn't have and turned her mule toward the mercantile. She bought salt and a needle with the last of the coin in her pocket. If the day went one way, the needle would mend her sleeve. If it went another, the salt would keep a body honest. The mercantile had a sign whose letters had started to peel off. Inside, everything smelled of unpainted wood and pine soap, and a little of tobacco. The man behind the counter had shoulders that made a joke out of shirt sleeves, and a face that had practiced not smiling too long. He looked at Vesper's lip like something he'd seen on a mule's hock. "We don't extend credit to strangers," he said, even though she hadn't asked. "Then let's not be strangers," Vesper said. "I'm Vesper." Macklin Crow, and the name fit him. Something about the tightness at the corners of his eyes, a bird that had learned to like sharp things. He took her coins, counted slower than he needed to, and slid her needle and salt across the counter. "If you're looking for Hart, he rides in to check accounts after sundown, talks low, pays cash, doesn't linger." Macklin's glance skated past Vesper to the door. "Sheriff is a word you'll want to be careful with," he added. "Tolliver Rake. Likes things orderly in a way that gets messy." "What does that mean?" "It means Tolliver can make a law out of whatever thought happens to be nearest. Some men pray before meals. He prays before punishments. Says he likes to give God a head start." "I'm not looking for him." Macklin's gaze returned to her mouth where the bruise had gone from plum to coal. "You say that like someone who already found him." "I sang," Vesper said, before she could talk herself into a lie. "On the road, it helps. Some men asked for a different song, and when they didn't get it, they used their hands to do the talking." She lifted her chin and watched the knowledge move through Macklin's eyes like a slow cloud. Disapproval, calculation, something almost like respect, and then something that was not. "I kept sinning," she added, soft as linen. "They didn't like that either." "You shouldn't sing where the line can hear you," Macklin said. "What line?" He jerked his head west toward a crease of ground where the grass went from gray-green to old bruises. "County draw, also where Rook Marlowe keeps his men these days. He hears a voice cross it. He comes to check who owns it." Vesper felt the notes in her chest cinch tight and then loosen again. "I thought raiders liked noise." "They like to make it. That's a different thing." Macklin leaned on the counter. "You say you've got business with Gideon Hart. Tell me your business." "I'll tell him." "That'll go easier if you tell me first." Vesper slid the salt and needle into her jacket pocket. The mule stamped outside, as if reminding her the day had bones. "It's his wife." "Eloan," Macklin said, and something almost human moved his mouth. "What about her?" Vesper turned toward the door. She had practiced this line to the point of ruin. "I believe," she said, tasting the edge of the words, "that I am her daughter." The room took a breath and held it until the walls creaked. Macklin's hands, which seemed designed for shoving men through doors, went very still. "That would be a trick," he said. It wouldn't be a trick. Vesper reached beneath her collar and drew out the lark's feather, bound with a thread that had once been red, then sun, then trust. She said this into my shirt the day someone took me south. She said when the wind gets lost, the lark shows it the way back. The sentence came out without tremor. It was the next one that shook her. I didn't get to ask her where back was.
Macklin's jaw worked. Gideon has no children. Maybe he didn't know. For a man who keeps his fences straight, that would be an odd thing not to notice. Vesper let the feather fall against her throat. Sometimes the fence was put up while you slept. Macklin looked at the hill, then at Vesper, then at the hill again, his body like a compass unwilling to decide where north had gone. "Sun goes down in an hour," he said finally. "You could wait on the porch, not inside. Tolliver comes through, I'd rather not explain why I let rumors sit on my floorboards." Vesper sat on the porch. The mule nosed at her hand until she shared a corner of jerked meat the size of a communion piece. Vesper did not eat. A woman passed with a basket of clean shirts and gave Vesper's bruised jaw a look that folded and unfolded like a paper prayer. A boy dragged a stick along the fence and made every nail sing. The town's church bell creaked and caught and gave up, and somebody laughed the sad kind of laugh. The hill waited. Gideon Hart came in like a man who had been riding his thoughts too long. The horse he dismounted from had a bright eye and a darker impatience. Gideon was built plain and sturdy and had rook's kind of shoulders, but the rest of him said he paid attention to weather and the cost of oats, and whether you watered grief or left it to curl up on its own. He had a beard that refused neatness and a voice that didn't waste what it couldn't spare. He saw Vesper the way you see a sudden snake in the path, all nerves, a quiver you pretend is the wind, an inch of space that is no longer your own. He removed a glove and set it on the hitch rail, then followed it with his left hand. He did both slowly, like each had weight. Macklin met him at the threshold. The two-man's talk lasted 3 words, and then none for a stretch, and then Macklin jerked his head toward Vesper. Gideon stepped onto the porch. "You said you had something to put in my ear," he said without hello. Vesper stood. Her knees did the thing they did when she thought about turning and walking away. She told them no. "Elowen, I think I'm the word faltered on its own edge. The one she lost." Gideon watched her like a man reads the weather 1 mile at a time. "What's your name?" "Vesper Quaid." She let it go like a stone through thin ice. "A woman who worked kitchens south of Trinidad called me that. She said my mother was a lark with feet of iron, and sometimes a lark needs a later song." Gideon's jaw moved once, twice the way men restart hearts in the chest of a dog that's been kicked. "Elowen never worked kitchens south of anything. She worked my land and rode my fence and kept my house. And then she kept the hill." "Before that," Vesper said, and it came out too quick, a horse taking the bit. She pulled herself hard at the reins. "Maybe before you knew her." Gideon's hand flexed. He did not say that no time counted before his time. His eyes said it for him. "Men have offered me money, Miss Quaid, for stories about my wife. They don't get to leave with their coin." "I don't want money." "What do you want?" I inhaled until my ribs stopped arguing with my lungs. "To stand at her marker," she said. "To ask if the lark knows its own song when someone else sings it. To see if the ground moves." The last came out before she could stop it. Macklin made a noise like a door that needed oil. Gideon's shoulders tightened, and for a second Vesper saw the man who kept a herd from thinking about fear with the pressure of 1 palm. The ground does what it's told. It doesn't move for talk. "It moved once for me," Vesper said, soft enough the mule lifted an ear. She had not meant to give that away. She felt it leaving her like heat. Gideon studied her. The porch boards remembered other conversations under both of their boots. Finally he said, "Sundown. Keep your voice low. If Tolliver likes the smell of your words, he'll drag them into the street and ask for second helpings." They went up the hill with the sun cooling across their backs. Vesper counted each plank in the little fence around the grave. 19. 1 cracked, 2 nailed by a hand that measured wrong and didn't care. The marker had Elowen's name carved in a steady hand. Elowen Hart, beloved. The sky doesn't empty out. It leans. Someone had added a lark no bigger than a thumbnail above the words. Someone who knew. Vesper's throat tried to close around her. She set her palm against the marker. The wood was warm. She closed her eyes and let the notes she had been holding since noon come to the edge. She had told Gideon she would keep her voice low. She kept her word. She laid the song where you put the quietest words in a house at night. The wind flattened itself to listen. Somewhere toward the line a horse stomped. Vesper felt tiny tremors in the earth. Not movement, exactly. Recognition. She finished the last note with nothing pretty on it and stood waiting for her body to realize it had not broken. When she looked up, Gideon hadn't moved, but something in his face had. He looked at the lark cut into the wood and his mouth opened and shut and opened again without words. "Elowen sang that," he said finally, like saying it cost him something. "Not like that," Vesper said, too fast again. She steadied. "Your Elowen's voice carried a scratch on the low C, like a door latch you oil twice and it still squeaks. She used that scratch like a hinge. It's in me. She tapped her chest once like a knuckle at a stranger's door. Gideon pulled off his hat and balled the brim in one hand. He stared at the words on the marker until the letters began to blur. "Who told me that?" She did, and Gideon flinched as if she'd struck him. In the kitchen where we were both too tired to swallow. In the night wagon when the man with the ledger said our names were too long to fit. She said it when she tied this feather into my collar. It was a long time ago, but some parts of a long time don't change. Gideon pressed the brim hard enough to warp it. He wore the pain like a man who prefers it to any other company. Delouin never was on a ledger. Maybe she kept it from you. Sometimes love is a room you don't show until you've scrubbed the walls. Don't talk to me like you know her more than I did. His voice was a door closing. He gripped the top rail of the little fence as if the hill meant to walk away. Miss Quaid, this is a grave. Whatever music you brought up here won't turn it into anything else. Vesper turned her head to the west where the ground grayed out. Wind moved across the line like it owed somebody money. Sometimes music marks a place, like a man carves initials into a beam. The wood keeps it even when the knife is gone. They walked down in a quiet that had body to it. At the bottom, the air grew barbed. Sheriff Tolliver Rake leaned against the water barrel with a paper cup crushed in one hand. He had the look of a man who stood in mirrors too long and memorized what he saw. His badge had been polished until it ate the light around it.
"Evening, Hart," he said in the tone men use when they want to be mistaken for neighbors. His eyes clicked past Gideon to Vesper as if she were a fly he meant to trap without breaking the wing. "We got us a new hymn bird?" "She's a traveler," Gideon said, "and a guest." Tolliver smiled like someone had just offered him a free tooth. "Guest of who?" "Mine." "That sounds like a claim." Tolliver hooked his thumb in his belt. "I could write it down for you, make it fit in the book. A man's peace rests easier when it's got paper under it." Gideon's eyes did the thing they did, that steadying. "You don't need to write anything." "Then I'll keep it in my head." Tolliver tilted his face to Vesper. "Miss Bird, we have a rule here about singing past the respectable hour, not because we don't like music." His tone made that last word peal. "Because Rook Marlowe is a jealous listener. Your kind of sounds go over the line. He sends boys to find the mouth that made 'em. When they can't tell, they make guesses. I don't like guessing." Vesper kept her hands at her sides. She let her fingers hug the hem of her jacket where the salt sat like a small white guarantee. "I keep my voice low." "Still travels," Tolliver said. "Besides, rumor says you use songs for other things, to get what you want, to make men softer than they should be." His eyes took a slow walk across Vesper's bruise. "Sometimes the world argues back." Gideon shifted his weight. "Sheriff." Tolliver raised a palm. "I'm preventative medicine, that's all. Keep your voice inside your own mouth after sundown, Miss Bird. Keep it there by morning, and we won't have to test whether the book I carry is heavier than your reasons." He let the crushed cup fall and ground it flat with his boot heel. "Night," he added, and his smile had the shape of a trap sprung in the dark. He ambled toward the jail with his hands behind his back, a man admiring his own evening. Gideon watched him go and said nothing. Vesper thought of saying thank you for the word guest, but it sounded like a thing you killed if you said it out loud. "Do you want me to stay or go?" she asked instead. Gideon's jaw worked. "Come to the ranch until morning. Then we'll see what the day thinks." The Hart place lay east where the parched ground remembered grass. The house was square and honest, the kind that apologized if it creaked at night. Ella, Gideon's cook, had a face like a door that never slammed. She set a bowl and bread in front of Vesper without looking at the bruise long. When Vesper hesitated, Ella pushed the bowl closer with 2 fingers. "Eat, child. You can explain who you are to men after your stomach has something to stand on." The first spoonful taught Vesper how empty she had been. She pushed the second too fast and coughed. Gideon watched, elbows on table, hands connected into a fist he didn't use. "You said someone took you south," Gideon asked. Vesper let the spoon rest. "A man with a ledger, and a woman with a voice that could make your bones feel clean. They wore respectability like a church hat. They trafficked in what would shame them if they named it. We were currency in their pockets." She reached for bread and tore it into careful halves. "I learned, before I learned anything else, that a voice can make a door swing or slam." "Who taught you that?" Gideon asked. "Everybody," Vesper said, and Ella made a small sound that could have been anything. "Work gangs taught me too. So did county men who say they protect you and mean they protect what they own." She held up the lark feather. "And a woman who taught me how not to let my songs become the only thing I'm good for." She let her eyes meet Gideon's. Sometimes she hummed when the ledger man was far, and she said, "It's not safe, but I'd rather be myself for a moment than live forever as a stranger. I used to think she was selfish for making the danger bigger. I don't think that anymore." Gideon looked down. The table's grain had a scar that followed his thumb like it liked him. "Elowyn wasn't selfish," he said. "No, she was wildfire with a pail of water in each hand." Ella cleared her throat. "Bed in the loft. Gideon, leave the girl to finish. You got fences tomorrow." Gideon stood. He placed his hat on a peg and missed. He did not pick it up. "If you sing tonight," he said at the doorway, "do it like you're talking to the inside of your mouth." Vesper slept 1 hour and then not at all. The loft window took the moon and made it pour. Night animals called in a key her bones knew from the road. She tucked the lark's feather under her pillow and lay awake waiting for morning to decide something for her. But morning had opinions about other people. Just before the sky thought about lightning, hoofbeats thudded in the yard. Not a handful that makes a visitor. A dozen, then more, then enough to make the house decide how strong it wanted to be. Ella came up the ladder without stepping on a single squeak. She said, "Stay low. Gideon's on the porch." The words fell in a braid. If the sheriff rode with them, we're going to practice being calm. If he didn't, we're going to practice being brave. Vesper rolled off the pallet and kept herself small. She recognized the rhythm of the men outside, the way a voice carried when it expected to be obeyed. She had heard it south of Trinidad and west of the line, and under a bridge where laughter echoed until you mistook it for help. Rook Marlowe liked to talk like he was wasting his time, teaching you things he already knew. "Gideon," came the call, polite as a polished boot on your throat. "We're collecting this morning. The law asked me to keep folks safe from songs that don't mind their borders. I'm a generous man." Gideon's reply came from the porch, even as the boards under him remembered the weight of a coffin they'd held years ago. "You don't work for the law, Marlowe." "I work for balance," Rook Marlowe said, and Vesper heard the smile in it. "Some sounds upset it. Send your canary out. We'll take her across the line and let her sing herself humble. She'll come back learned and grateful." Ella's hand tightened on Vesper's wrist. "If you go quiet, they'll hurt you because you're dull. If you go loud, they'll hurt you because you're bright. Pick the hurt you can survive," she whispered. Vesper's heart thudded to the same uneven beat it always did when men like Rook made noon out of daybreak. She could drop through the back, run for the cottonwoods, lose herself in the creek's thin talk. She could hide until men went back to nursing their hungers at someone else's table. Or she could step onto a porch and be the thing they wanted to shape until it broke. She went out. Gideon took a step toward her he didn't finish, as if he had learned not to stand between people and the harm they chose. Rook Marlowe sat his horse like a man who'd never been told no by anyone whose no he respected. He had a scarf tied loose at his throat, and the kind of hat that makes a town worry about its daughters. His men fanned in a crescent.
some with long coats that made theater out of menace, some with bare arms scabbed over with other people's mistakes. One held the reins of a big roan stallion with a Roman nose and a cheek scar that made him look permanently amused. "Mornin', Canary," Rook said, as if the day was a thing he had ordered up special. "I hear you've been confusing the wind about where it belongs." Vesper stood on the porch step with Wood at her back. She did not bow or spit or say anything about the name. She peered beyond Rook to where the land drained itself gray. The line waited like a throat that wanted what she had. "You ain't hired to be pretty," Rook went on. "You're hired to be obedient. Sing when we say, don't when we don't. The sheriff and me got an agreement. He keeps his tin shiny, and I keep the border clean. You're noise on the wrong side of a ledger." "Ledger," Vesper echoed, and the word slid in her mouth like a nail. Rook's chin twitched. "Come on, then. We'll give you a lesson in taxes. The first payment is your pride." He gestured, and two of his men stepped forward. Gideon moved, but not fast enough to pick a fight without losing the whole ranch. The men took Vesper by the upper arms, one with a jaw like a knuckle, one with breath that would sour milk. They didn't drag her through the yard so much as stage a show. Boots in dust, the sound of a house holding itself quiet, Ella's prayer without words.
They didn't take her far. Across the line was 5 minutes at a walk, less on a horse that liked to be asked twice. They took the long way so the road could see. The town woke to windows the shape of eyes. Tolliver Rake appeared at the far end of Maine like a coincidence that wanted credit. "Keep to your side," he called, not quite looking at Rook and not quite not. "We're neighbors, Sheriff," Rook sang back. "I'm borrowing a cup of sugar." They crossed the invisible border where the grass browned deeper and the wind got a little less friendly. Rook's men made a circle without being told. Vesper knew this dance too well, the way some men like geometry and their cruelty. The circle meant you would have to look at every face as his turn came. "Consider this a tithe to quiet," Rook said, and then he stopped speaking like a gentleman. The first blow came from the man with the knuckle jaw, open palm and fast, the kind you give to see how the face takes pain. Vesper's head rocked and found itself. She kept breathing in the count Elowin had given her, low through the difficult place at the bottom of the ribs. A second blow wanted to knock the rhythm loose. A third made her taste the old iron again. "We'll help you learn the volume of a decent woman," Rook said, conversational. "We'll beat the extra out of you until only the Sunday's left. Then maybe you'll keep to your side of the fence." The fourth man swung lazy, like he was bored by his own violence. Lazy hurt worse. Vesper's knees softened. The ground under her tilted and then remembered its job. She blinked, and the world did not come back any kinder. "Sing," Rook said, softly, leaning in so only she could hear. His breath smelled like apples gone wrong. "Not because I asked, because it's the only thing you've got to keep your bones together." Vesper looked at him with one eye open and one refusing any more light. If she sang, they would call it provocation. If she didn't, they would call it defiance. There wasn't a word she could pick that would turn fists into something else, but there was a sound she might make that remembered her to herself. She let her breath stack into the odd scaffolding she kept secret. She let the low note find the bottom of her, not pretty, functional like a splint. The men laughed because men laugh when they think a woman chooses the wrong weapon, not knowing she is just counting. "Louder," Rook said. "Let the line hear you." Vesper lifted the note. It found the scratch on the low C, the hinge Elowin had taught her to use, the little trouble in the throat that mistakes itself for weakness until you set your weight on it and discover the door is stronger than it looks. The sound didn't go up, it went underneath. It ran along the ground like a creek no map had bothered to name. The roan stallion's ear flicked. Horses hate some violin strings and not others. They'll tell you long before men will. The roan let his jaw loosen and then tightened it. He stamped once. Rook's hand, still on the rein, twitched without meaning to. Vesper lifted the note again, sliding it under the horse the way you slide a crate on a barn floor. She felt the vibration bounce back, the weight taut wire hums in your palm, and then felt it change into something else, a knocking from the earth up, a body remembering gravity and deciding to befriend it. "Enough," Rook said. His voice did a small, strange thing, cracked and then cleared. "You don't sing when I say sing, Canary. You sing when I'm ready to be sung to." Vesper held the note anyway. The hinge rasped and caught and rasped again. The scallion's head dropped. He pulled against the rein, not angry, confused. His forelegs spread like he was considering prayer. The men went quieter than pride wanted them to. The horse's front knees trembled, then bent. He sank like he had been taught to bow by a patient hand. One foreleg hit dirt, then the other. The big animal kept breathing and tried to be sensible about what his body was doing without his permission. "Hold him," one of the men said, and then worried his voice had sounded like fear. "Let go," another suggested, which was worse. Rook yanked at the rein as if will could make physics reconsider. The haunches quivered, then settled. Horse and ground made a conversation of dust. Rook stared at Vesper with his mouth half open. He had the look of a man who drops a coin and hears a church bell. "What the hell did you do?" he whispered, and it wasn't bluster. It was ritual fear. "Found a note your horse likes," Vesper said, and spit blood to one side. They did not hit her during the silence that followed. Some of that was awe. Some of that was that men do not like to strike a woman when their mount is kneeling. It makes them notice themselves. Gideon stood at the line with his fists open and the bones in them loud. He did not step over. The law in men like Tolliver required obedience in men like Gideon to keep order's story clean. Ella had her apron in both hands. She twisted it once and never untwisted it. "Back up," Rook told his men, quietly, like they were standing too close to a cliff you couldn't see in daylight. He dismounted with a care men reserve for new bridges, tossed the reins to a man whose knuckles had names, and walked towards Vesper like he could read what she'd done by peering into her mouth. "You'll do that again," he said. "I won't," Vesper said. "You will," he said, like he had all the time in the world. "We'll bruise the music out of you until only the part that listens to me is left. We'll train your throat the way you train a colt, till he thinks the rope was his idea." He put a finger under her chin, the way a man handles a glass he means to break later. "Where'd you learn that notch?" "From a woman who knew a lark's job isn't to be pretty. It's to show the wind it's not a mistake." Rook's eyes shifted as if a picture he hadn't requested came into focus behind Vesper's face. "Say her name," he said. Vesper pressed her tongue to the bruise on the inside of her cheek until the pain's edge made the world obliging. "Elowin," she said, and the syllables changed the air like heat. Something crossed Rook's face quick as a cloud's shadow. For a heartbeat, he looked like a child listening behind a door he was supposed to guard. He stepped back, and the stallion lifted his head by an inch, as if the note had been shut in a drawer. "Again," Rook said, not loud, starved. Vesper inhaled and set the hinge. The hinge rasped and caught and rasped again. The stallion's eyes went to the horse, then back to her mouth, then to Gideon at the line. "Who taught you that?" he asked, and it wasn't a threat now. It was a man in a burned house checking each room for a family that doesn't live there anymore. "Her," Vesper said, before men with ledgers made sure teaching was a chargeable offense. Rook's jaw bunched. He took her by the arm and turned her toward the line, as if the border was a mirror he had been avoiding, and the day had finally forced him to go stand in front of it.
"We're finished here," he called to Gideon, "for now." He let go of Vesper and let his palm remember her arm after. "Not finished," Tolliver Rake said, strolling closer like this was all a fair he had organized. He held his book under one arm as if it were a baby that owed him something. He smiled at Rook. "You take her, you spend her up. Leave the town to me." Vesper's teeth tucked themselves into her lower lip before she remembered that not bleeding was cheaper. She wiped her mouth with the back of one hand and looked at Gideon. He had moved without moving, closer, but not enough to change the story on paper. "I'm not property," she said, and her voice did not shake the way she had trained it not to. "Everything is property if you write it right," Tolliver said, affable as barrel stabs. "Ask any man who owns a deed."
Rook swung back into his saddle. The stallion rose with a groan like an old hinge, then stood, legs stiff, eye white. Rook put a hand to the animal's neck, and it looked like apology. He was good to horses. Men who are good to horses are not always good to anything else. "Across the line," he said. "We'll teach you what to do with that noise in your ribs." He turned the horse with his knees. His men started to move like a tide that had agreed to a schedule. "Rook," Gideon said, and it dropped into the dust like a coin into a well you do not expect to ring. Rook looked back. She said Ilowen. Rook's mouth hardened. Lots of women say that name when they want a thing. "Not with that notch," Gideon said, and there was a quiet behind the words that did not belong to fear. "Not with that hinge." Vesper felt something ridiculous and cruel like hope. It rose and then cut itself on the edges of everything around it. She let it bleed and did not say mercy in case the word heard her and decided to test her. "Stop talking," Tolliver said, cheerful as a cat near a coop. "Stop talking and do the work men do." He looked at Vesper. "Miss Bird, if you come back, I expect your volume measured like flour, flat across the top." Rook put his hand out. The man with knuckle-jaw shoved Vesper forward. The circle broke to make a corridor. The line waited. It always did. Vesper set one foot where the grass changed color. She could feel the border like a temperature difference between rooms. Her body recognized it. Her bones had memorized other borders the way a knife memorizes handles. "Walk," Rook said. Vesper took a breath and did the only disobedience left to her that would not cost a life she couldn't repay. She sang. Not loud, not pretty. She went under the sound again, the hinge, the scrape, the scratch, Ilowen's signature, until the roan's knees trembled. "Don't," Rook said sharply, and for the first time there was no theater in it. "I don't ask twice about the same mercy, girl." Vesper stopped. The air thinned. The world waited on one more word. Rook leaned down in the saddle until the brim of his hat kept the sun off her eyes. He said it like a man who'd had feeling used against him. "Then don't feel." And the smallest part of her wanted him to fail at that. A shot cracked from nowhere, a flat, impatient sound that tried to make the day jump a chapter. The man on Rook's left grabbed at his thigh and cursed. Every gun in the crescent lifted at once. Gideon did not move. Tolliver did not blink. Ella did not scream, though her mouth opened like a window. On the hill above the town, the cottonwood lifted its arm in the small wind. Something, no larger than a man's fist, no louder than a lark landing, shifted the dirt inside Ilowen Hart's fence. Vesper felt it in her feet before her brain could name it. It was not movement exactly. It was the idea of movement, the suggestion. The sentence started and not finished. Every head turned toward the hill as if pulled by the same string. Rook's horse shied. Tolliver's hand went to his book. Gideon's fingers spread like they were remembering the size of a grave. Vesper looked up to the cottonwood and thought with a clarity that made her bruises sit up and listen. If the dead want something, this is the hour they pick. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you.
Air. The shadow outside the plank door breathed as if breath were currency and he'd been stingy all his life. Vesper heard it because her bones had learned to listen to what air did when it hesitated before a lie. Marigold heard it because she counted everything that moved in her rooms and had never made peace with the idea of a surprise. Kestrel heard it because the ground told her in the small ticks wood makes when it has accepted weight it didn't ask for. Marigold didn't look up. She slid her hand under the table and flipped a latch Vesper hadn't noticed. Beneath Vesper's boots, the floorboards shifted a fraction of an inch, then settled again like an animal deciding not to spook. The plank door stayed shut. The shadow waited, as if a hinge note might leak through by accident. "Say it," Marigold said to Vesper, not unkindly. "Say the thing you came here to be afraid of." Vesper's mouth tasted like pencil shadings. "What if I find her," she said, meaning Elowen, meaning the ache that had kept her moving, and the finding doesn't fix anything. "Then you'll know," Marigold said. "Knowing is cheaper than not knowing, even if you pay with skin. Now, this ledger." She pushed the book toward Vesper and flattened a page with the edge of her hand. "You see these little birds?" The column of numbers were neat official hats. Between them, tiny marks had been tucked, so small you'd miss them if you didn't know women taught each other to write under men's rules. A curl here, an extra line on a lowercase t there. Vesper leaned in. Her lip throbbed like a metronome. "Larks," she said. "Wrong end of winter." Marigold's mouth offered the idea of a smile, wrong end meaning the tail. You follow every tale in this book and you land on a shipment the men thought was lumber and wasn't. Coded consignments. Women moving women. She tapped a string of initials. NYD. "And this?" "Not yet done," Vesper said. "Good girl," Marigold said, and erased the endearment with a brisk blink. "When you see that, it means the run didn't complete the way it was meant. Sometimes that's bad. Sometimes it's a gift the world wasn't prepared to call a gift yet." Kestrel leaned over Vesper's shoulder, their hair nearly touched. Vesper felt the static of that almost touch like a nail rubbed along cloth. "Where does the tail lead?" Kestrel asked. "South Switch, old brickyard. There's a counting house there we can't topple yet. We can shake its shelves. I've been tapping it for months. You two will open it." "We?" Vesper asked. Marigold smiled with one side of her mouth. "My wrists know how to break locks. They don't have the hinge your throat has. You'll sing that house open, girl, not because stone cares about music, but because men do, and men built the door." A grit drifted off one of the rafters, as if dust had caught its breath and then given up. Marigold cocked her head. The shadow outside shifted weight. She nodded at Kestrel. Kestrel slipped to the plank and knocked with 2 fingers, a rhythm that had no business meaning anything and somehow did. The shadow jerked away the length of an oath. The mule outside stamped, a soft, irritated emphasis. "We don't have long," Marigold said. "Rook's boys pretend to be lazy until the sun moves. Then they get ideas. Tolliver will do what he does best, make a path where he walks feel like law, and tell himself virtue built it." She flipped the ledger closed and slid it into a canvas sack already fat with paper. "You take this. If a man stops you, tell him it's flour. Shake it. Lie like you have been forgiven for lying." Vesper took the bag. It was lighter than she expected and heavier than she wanted. "What about you?" Vesper asked. "I'll stay here and pretend to be a woman who can't make a difference," Marigold said. "It's the most powerful disguise I own. Go."
"Closed," he said, and took a bite that dripped down his cuff. "We aren't customers," Kestrel said. "Then you're nothing," he said, and discovered too late that the sentence made a neat little trap he'd placed for his own feet. Vesper stepped forward before Kestrel could set the man down with charm or bone. She didn't sing. She spoke in the quiet that had been living at the bottom of her since they opened the grave. "A woman is buried up the road where the ground doesn't contain her," she said. "We came to collect what the earth refused to eat." The man's knife paused. He frowned the way people do when a smell reminds them of a house they haven't admitted missing. "What are you talking?" "Debt," Vesper said. She let the word hang there like a horse held steady by a palm at the shoulder. "This house counts it. We came to subtract." He laughed, but the laugh knew it was late. Kestrel lifted her hand. The knife that had liked rope more than fruit found itself momentarily attached to a woman's attention span. "Don't," Kestrel said, and then softer. "Go eat your apple under another roof. This roof's about to remember what it's for." He stared at them, trying to locate the teacher whose lesson he was about to be made to suffer. He settled on Vesper, men usually did, because she carried her voice in her face whether she used it or not. He made the mistake of leaning in. "Sing for me," he said, in a voice that thought it had been honey once. Vesper held his gaze until the part of him that moved when women met his eyes got bored. "No," she said. "Save your listening for when you need it." He flinched as if someone had pulled his breath out on a string. Then pride returned with its cocked hat and rescued him from wisdom. "Inside is for counting men's money," he said, getting up. "You go across the line if you want to count something else." "Inside is for counting lives," Kestrel said. "You just never learned the numbers." She twisted the knife out of his hand with a movement so clean it might have been the turn of a page. He staggered in surprise, more than pain, looked at his empty hand as if it had betrayed him, and backed off the step. He remembered then that he had friends who liked to be called when parts of the morning tried to grow difficult. He put 2 fingers in his mouth to whistle. Vesper's palm went out, not at his face, not at his chest, at the air in front of his mouth. "Don't," she said again, not to him, but to the sound. It stopped at the lip of her hand and went nowhere. That was a trick she didn't know she could do. It felt like lifting a bowl with breath instead of fingers. "Go," Kestrel told him a second time. He went, his boots discovering how to be uncertain on dirt. They stepped into the counting house. It smelled of mold and confidence. Shelves stood in narrow aisles, a library men had built to make themselves feel like truth. Vesper wanted to walk every row and hold each ledger open until the ink confessed its crimes. But the kind of morning they had didn't allow for a sermon. She found the wall that had a door's posture without a doorknob and put her ear to the board. Kestrel set her hand above Vesper's head, the way you would place a palm on a breaking beam. "Under," Kestrel said. "Under," Vesper agreed. She sang, not a melody, not something a person could hum later and think of her. She rubbed her voice along the seam between jam and jammed. The note found the hinge, not made of brass or iron, but of expectation. Somewhere in the building, a type of tension let go. The wall parted enough to be called a door by anyone honest. Inside the second room, the air went colder. That was how you knew men had been storing women. Heat loves us. Cold pretends it owns the invoice. There were cages, but not the iron ones you could hate from a distance. These were cages built from debt. Baskets of hair, scraps of ribbon, a shoe, a broken watch labeled with a girl's name spelled wrong so the man who took it could insist she didn't exist. Kestrel exhaled like she had been holding her breath since she was 12 years old. Vesper's hands fluttered and then steadied, the way birds do when they learn the wind's shoulders. "Not yet done," Kestrel pointed. On the far wall, the words had been scratched small in the plaster, where no one would place a shelf because the nails fell out there. She was here. Vesper swallowed. The scratch sat at the bottom of her throat like it recognized where to live. When? Marigold would have known to the week, Kestrel knew to the mile. Long enough for Dust to forget the exact day, recent enough for Dust to remember being asked to keep the secret. "Looking for contraband?" said a voice from the doorway that had not been a doorway, and Vesper's body recognized it before her mind did. Tolliver Rake came in with his hat tilted toward sanctimony. He held his book like a Bible in a family that preferred lawsuits. 3 deputies braided themselves to his shoulders. They looked more like boys who had learned that a badge makes your mother proud than like men who had decided they were willing to carry the cost of enforcement. Kestrel did not reach for the knife that she had borrowed from the apple. She put her hand back on the wall and kept it there, as if the plaster depended on her to be more than chalk. "We're reading," she said. "Reading where only the law is licensed to read. That's how fires start. People take letters out of the mouths of people who had the right to own them." He lifted his chin toward the shelves. "Step away." Vesper did not move. "We're not taking anything." "Not yet," he corrected, smiling. "Not yet done, perhaps." His teeth were even in the way men with rich grandmothers have their teeth straightened. He gestured to the words on the plaster. "I read my town as carefully as I read my book." "Then you know this house kept women the way a winter keeps food," Kestrel said. "I know this house kept order. Order requires ledgers. Ledgers require offices. Offices require men. If a woman appears in a ledger, it is because a man witnessed her. The alternative is chaos." "Or freedom," Vesper said. "See? Chaos." He turned to the boys he had dressed as deputies. "Search them." Kestrel looked at Vesper like you look at a person you're about to ask a favor of when you'd rather not. Vesper nodded once. She set her shoulders so they'd be ready to be handled without forgetting the difference between body and person. The boys came in sideways as if flirtation could be colonial rule. Vesper held their eyes and thought of the note she was saving for the door. She did not want to waste it on boys. A shout reached them like a truth shouted from outside a church to a wedding. "Sheriff?" Rook's man with the apple-sticky cuff appeared over Tolliver's shoulder, breath hot for having run. "He's here." "Who?" Tolliver asked, offended by the idea of a subject he hadn't chosen. "Rook," the man said. "Then he can wait," Tolliver said. The man shook his head, eyes wide with a weather no badge could control. "Not inside," he said. Rook Marlowe stepped through what the man had not had the words to call a second door. He filled space some men leave available for oxygen. His hat was off. His hair looked like it regretted a choice it made years back and had decided to double down. He carried no gun in his hand because the room already belonged to him in his mind, and he'd never needed to hold a thing to own it. "Don't search them," he said to Tolliver, like reminding a boy about manners he had previously praised. "You'll find a book that belongs to a woman who knows more about books than both of us. Then you'll be embarrassed. Why do that in front of the girls?" "Don't call us girls," Kestrel said, with the slow patience of a teacher whose hand had been slapped once too often. He inclined his head to her, the respect genuine and weary. "My mistake. Ladies with better work to do than listen to men settle a thing they won't let die." His eyes found Vesper as if Magnet knew where the metal had gone. The line at his mouth moved a fraction. "You shouldn't be here."
"Neither should she," Vesper said, and jerked her chin at the words on the wall. Rook didn't look. He had looked before. "Elowen isn't here," he said. "She was. She will be elsewhere by night." He shifted as if the ground had asked him to decide if he was friendly. "You want her. So do I." "Why?" Vesper asked. Rook's jaw worked like a man chewing regret and finding it tougher than jerky. "Because I owe her," he said. "Because I let something get written down that should have been walked, not notarized. Because there are notes a man shouldn't hear unless he promises to be careful with them afterward. I didn't make that promise. She taught it to me and I pretended I'd always had it." Tolliver sniffed. "This is not a confessional," he said. "Everything is," Rook replied. He turned back to the women. "There's a train tonight. Harrow. Counting house farther south. If you two insist on being the people you are, you'll try to get on it. The doors will close. The world will make a point with your bodies." He let that settle in the room and then added, almost softly, "Let me pay the fare." Vesper stared at him. Rage rose like heat, then failed to find a place to burn. You don't get to buy what women build by going broke. You don't get to turn debt into virtue and call it even. Rook didn't flinch. "Then tell me the other way," he said. "I'll use it." Kestrel's voice was low. Stop asking the wind to change its name and learn how to sail in it. A sound cut the room. A metal on metal that wasn't train, wasn't tool. Rook and Tolliver both recognized it because both had ordered it made. A lock sliding into a position that would end a conversation. The second door began to close. Something in the wall had gotten tired of choosing which side owned it. "Out," Kestrel said. They went out, Rook first because he refused to be trapped anywhere he could be accused of having engineered. Tolliver second because he didn't like rooms that taught him he was not in charge of air. The deputies because they needed the sheriff to keep believing them men, and then Vesper and Kestrel together because they had learned not to let doors decide who walked ahead. They got to the yard as the lock shot home and stayed, the kind of final that makes even honest men reconsider their testimony. The sky had gone bright with the kind of blue that pretends nothing bad happens under it. The mule swung his head and let out a comment about people and patience. "Night," Rook said. "Train." He touched 2 fingers to his hat, the gesture a promise or a lie, depending on whether you thought men changed. He was gone then, and Vesper wondered if he disappeared or if you simply stopped seeing him when he decided your eyes needed a rest. Tolliver lingered. "I can stop you," he said. And something in Vesper broke, not like glass, like a knot. She bit back the word that could ruin everything and spoke only the truth left after the fire. "You can't," she said. "You can only say you did." He lifted the book. He didn't open it. "Be careful," he said, and the thing in his voice wasn't for Vesper. It was for himself. They made their plan in the privacy of a shadow where men's ears had lost interest. Marigold's door wouldn't hold against the kind of search Rook could order if he let himself be afraid. They had hours. Vesper would sleep none of them. Kestrel would measure them with a finger on the mule's neck where the heartbeat made time human. "The train yard is watched," Kestrel said. "We can't walk in as women and expect men to see us as women who ought to be left alone." "We could walk in as women and expect men to think we're men," Vesper said. "Now you're talking my terrible language." Kestrel grinned. They stabled the mule in a place Marigold's friends used when they had animals they didn't want the law to make sermons about. They dressed in jackets with too many pockets and hats that made their shadows wider. Kestrel wrapped Vesper's chest with a band of cloth that used to be a curtain in a house where a woman had once been allowed to sew and not much else. Vesper stared at herself in the cracked glass and thought, "I look like someone men will trust to lift boxes." The thought did not please her. It pleased her anyway. As dusk took the edges off the world, they moved along the line the way 2 thoughts move through a man's head when he's deciding to do something he will later deny. Marigold joined them at the edge of the coal yard. She wore a cap low and her mouth lower. "You'll get 1 minute of mess if I give it to you. Use it to find the car." "What car?" Vesper asked. "The one where they keep a choir that doesn't get to call itself that. The women they label wrong. They ship them as laundry or faith or furniture. Listen for the note that has a scratch in it." Vesper swallowed. Kestrel squeezed her shoulder once. Rook's stallion moved on the far side of the yard like a piece of night had decided to share its legs with him. Vesper tried not to see him the way you try not to look at a fire that knows your name. Marigold stepped into the open as if she had been placed there by the stubborn hand of fate. She tossed a handful of something that flashed dull in the yard lamps. Sparks sprang up like seeds. A small fire put its head up to see if the night wanted company. Men swore. Buckets ran through hands. The trainmaster shouted about incompetence. For a perfect 60 seconds, nobody watched anything but flame and water trying to decide who raised better children. Vesper and Kestrel cut along the backs of the cars. They counted by smell, canvas, barley, chalk, oil, soap, and then something that had pretended to be soap for a very long time without knowing what clean meant. Kestrel put her ear to the seam of the door and shook her head. Vesper closed her eyes and let the yard's noise fall through her like chaff.
Beneath it, faint, a note dragged itself uphill, the way a woman climbs when the switchback has not been cut. It had the scratch. It had the hinge. It had a woman tightening her mouth against pain and making her mouth do something beautiful anyway. "This one," Vesper said. They levered the freight seal with a nail Kestrel had worn on a cord against her ribs for 5 years. The door slid and stuck and slid again. The smell hit them. Starch, fear, lavender, lies. Inside, women sat on crates, pretending not to lean on each other. A man with a hymn book he hadn't learned to read properly sat near the door with a pistol at his ankle and a face that had been told his virtue would be visible if he kept his hair neat. Kestrel moved like wind around a corner. The hymn book went one way, the pistol went another. The man discovered that God didn't like to be used as a baton and passed out promptly like a boy at his first harvest dance. "Who is Elowen?" Kestrel whispered, because whispering in the presence of fear is kinder than speaking. Heads lifted, eyes measured. The women did not answer. Women being shipped as furniture learn not to say names to strangers. Vesper stepped further into the car. She sang once on the low C, the scratch quick as a match strike. One head snapped up. A girl, not a woman, 16 at most, skin the color of land after rain, eyes storing more history than a town allows a child to hold. "She taught me that," the girl said. "Where is she?" Vesper asked. Her gaze slid to the floor and then back to Vesper like an apology. "She's gone ahead," she said. "They took her off at Quarry Switch. She told me to sing anyway so somebody like you would find us. She said if the ground shook under your feet, it was her saying don't stop for anyone who calls himself law." Kestrel's breath came out in a sawed-off prayer. Vesper felt panic rise like a horse that had forgotten its training. She kept her hand on its neck. "You know her?" she asked the girl. "She called me Wren," the girl said, not proudly, just placing the fact where it went. "How many?" Kestrel asked, eyes scanning the car for a head count she could carry. 12, Wren said. 13 if you count the baby. She nodded toward a crate where a woman rocked a very small sound into the air and gave it a home. Elowen said the number is wrong unless the baby learns to breathe in a place that doesn't smell like soap. Noise swelled at the far end of the yard. Men had remembered other responsibilities. The trickle of attention that had left this side became a tide again. The mule couldn't do anything to help. Marigold's fire had decided it didn't want to be a sermon and died down.
"Can you move?" Kestrel asked the women. They stood. You had to admire the way women stand when they are told to by other women. It is church and storm drill in one motion. Vesper moved to help the woman with the baby. The child's breath came in little jealous puffs. "What's his name?" Vesper asked, and the woman said Ephraim, so quietly Vesper almost missed it. "We can get them to the creek," Kestrel said. "Beyond that." "Marigold will know the next door," Vesper said. "She always does." They started a chain, women passing women through a slot that had been built to move grain. Kestrel took the outside, easing feet to ties as if ties were invented for this and not for holding the weight of trains. Vesper sang a steadying line that sounded like a mother inside a storm, telling her children which room had the least windows. The note never grew loud. It didn't need to. It held its palm just above the noise, and the noise chose politeness. They got 7 out before the yard remembered its obligations. A man in a felt vest and a grudge turned the corner of the car with the competence of a professional interruption. He had a whistle. He put it to his mouth. Vesper's palm went up a second time in the night to say, "No." The whistle made a small, embarrassed squeak, and then went on strike. The man's eyes did a calculation that included violence and ended with fear. He grabbed for the gun at his hip. Kestrel did not waste a second on his choices. She stepped in, took his wrist, and suggested the ground. The ground agreed. He went down hard enough to remember it and soft enough to forgive her later. She took the gun and put it in a coal bucket where it wouldn't be at hand when he looked for it. "Go to sleep," she told him, and the suggestion reached something honest in him he'd been hiding from all day. 9, 10, 11. The baby's mother last because she would have it that way. 12. Wren stayed. "I can open the other car," she said. "There's another on the next track." "No," Kestrel said. "There's not time for everything good." "There is if you don't ask permission," Wren said, and Vesper fell a little in love with the girl the way women do when a younger woman reminds them of the part of themselves they thought this world had killed. Go, Vesper told Kestrel. Kestrel hesitated the length of a habit, then nodded. Meet at the creek. If I'm not there, you go anyway. Wren slid around the end of the car like a fish around a snag. Vesper heard the sure little rasp of a stolen nail in a freight seal, and the quiet, triumphant sound of a door learning its mistake. The second car held 6 women whose faces said they weren't surprised to be saved and were very tired of paying the price for their lack of surprise. "The baby?" one asked in a language Vesper didn't have the map for. Wren answered in the same language, and the woman added a sound that had to be a word that meant thank you and forgive the world for its delay. Vesper took a hand. The hand took hers back with more authority than Vesper felt entitled to. They ran. Not the kind of run that throws its arms and begs to be chased. The kind of women specialize in. Efficient, quiet, purposeful, at a speed calculated to arrive with breath left for the next thing. Vesper kept count the way Kestrel had taught her in the grave. Not of feet, of promises. The creek took them in. The stones remembered them from last time. The mule was where they'd left him. Marigold's people appeared out of the kind of dark that isn't sinister, it's helpful. Doors that weren't doors opened. Shadows that were doors closed again behind bodies and made those bodies into people. Kestrel met them at the bend with a face that had taught itself not to panic years ago and still occasionally remembered why it had learned. "Men coming," she said. "The kind that asks questions after they hit." Wren held Vesper's sleeve. "Elowen," she said. "Query switch." Kestrel's jaw tightened. "That's a long mile in short time." "We're long women," Vesper said, and found she meant it. Marigold's hand landed on Vesper's shoulder, and she nodded toward the women and the baby in the math of safety. "I'll carry these," she said. "You go do the stupid brave thing. It's the only kind I trust." She turned to Wren. "You come back to me after you do the other stupid brave thing." And Wren's face made the small, fierce shape of a person who has decided not to die tonight. They doubled back along the creek's mouth and cut due south, where the ground turned to trousers and railroad gravel. Rook's stallion snorted somewhere behind them like a man clearing his throat in a church where he didn't like the sermon. Tolliver's deputies' voices braided uneasily with men who didn't answer to a badge, and never planned to. "Why is he helping us?" Vesper asked, breath even, legs negotiating for the darkness for space. "He's not," Kestrel said. "He's helping himself not be the man he was last Tuesday." "Is that allowed?" "Everything's allowed," Kestrel said. "That's the problem. Some of us choose differently." They reached Query Switch as the sky thought about losing its nerve and turning gray. The switching house loomed like an apology on stilts. A lantern burned low. A man dozed in a chair with his feet on the desk and his hat down over his nose. The universal symbol for boys who get to pretend they guard things. Vesper heard it before Kestrel did, not because her ears were better, but because the sound had a key cut for her. A woman's voice, low, raw along the hinge, singing vowels that weren't for public use. It came from a small shed off the switch house that the boards had learned not to complain about nails. Vesper's hand landed on Kestrel's arm like a promise and a seatbelt. "Careful," Kestrel said. Vesper nodded. She did not wait. Careful and waiting weren't married. They barely nodded at each other when they crossed the road. She slid to the shed and put her palm to the wood. It vibrated the way a heart does when it has been trying to do too much with too little. She pressed her cheek against the seam and closed one eye. The crack between boards gave her the slit of the room the way it gives light permission. Inside, a woman stood facing a wall. Her hair was plaited and then unplaited by impatient hands. Her shoulders had the slope of someone who had been asked to be a bridge more times than should be required by even the kindest of countries. She sang not to please, but to align a room that had been built crooked. Vesper didn't breathe for 3 beats. The 4th beat hurt, because it always does when your body remembers what living costs. "Elowen," Vesper said, and the wood agreed, and the air decided. And her voice belonged to the shape of the name. The woman turned. She wasn't ancient. She wasn't young.
She wasn't a woman whose beauty made men speak in tongues. She was a woman whose bones made men reconsider their definitions. Her eyes found the crack. Her mouth did a thing Vesper had done since she was 10, whenever she heard somebody call a roll in a name that could have been hers. It closed for a hard moment and then opened, because it decided the risk was less expensive than the regret. Vesper, Eowyn said, and Vesper's knees went obediently to their work. Kestrel's arm on Vesper's arm tightened. The door to the shed moved under Kestrel's fingers a fraction and then stopped. She shifted, found the right spot, and lifted. It rose on a hinge that had rusted on purpose and now forgave with astonishment. Eowyn stepped into the doorway. Kestrel's face closed and opened in a different order than Vesper's had. The same recognition, the same fear, the same reprimand for ever believing that this was allowed. Eowyn looked at Kestrel next, and her breath hitched as if someone had called a number that never in her life had been called for her. "Kestrel," she said, and the name was not a question, and it was not a question. Footsteps on the gravel outside reminded everyone that miracles don't stop math. Rook appeared as if the night had been keeping him for a reveal. Tolliver with him, for once walking in rhythm. Two of Rook's men flanked, fidgeting like solutions in search of her Covablum. "You're early," Rook told Eowyn, as if she had been keeping an appointment he hadn't earned the right to announce. "You're late," Eowyn said, without venom. "You always were." She looked past him to Vesper. "You brought my wind back." "I followed it," Vesper said, and her voice did not shake because every shake her body had stored for this moment was busy elsewhere holding her up. Tolliver sighed, an oddly human sound from a man who had practiced being a policy. "We can't do this here," he said. "There are procedures." Kestrel laughed once, and the laugh didn't find it necessary to pause for decency. "Write us a permission note for Joy. Laminate it. Wear it on a chain." Rook's face had softened and hardened so many times he looked like two men taking turns. "You're early," Rook told Eowyn, as if she had been keeping an appointment he hadn't earned the right to announce. "You're late," Eowyn said, without venom. "You always were." She looked past him to Vesper. "You brought my wind back." "I followed it," Vesper said, and her voice did not shake because every shake her body had stored for this moment was busy elsewhere holding her up.
The wagon's rattle approached. Men in hats who didn't believe they'd been paid enough to be brave had learned a way of walking that looked like conviction from far away. Kestrel's eyes flicked to the switch house and back. "We can cut the rails," she said. "Not with that," Rook said. "You'd need a saw and 20 minutes. You've got 2. And a song." He looked at Vesper then, in a way that let the room see the man he could be if nobody reminded him of the man he'd been. "You want to stop a wagon with a ledger and a warrant on it?" he asked. "Make his horses think the ground is better than whatever he's asking them to do." Vesper had done it once without asking permission from herself. Doing it on purpose felt like asking the wind to perform and promising not to turn into the men she hated in the asking. Kestrel's palm found the back of Vesper's neck. "Not a lock," she said. "A hinge. Let them kneel because they need to rest, not because you forced their prayer." Vesper nodded. She stepped into the road. Eowyn's fingers squeezed once and let go like a blessing and a threat. "Come back." The wagon reached the bend. The horse's ears forked forward and reconsidered the world. Vesper set her voice on the scrape she had been born with. She put no anger into it. She put the polite exhaustion of a good animal. She let the note be the halfway house between running and stopping. The first horse slowed, then sank. The second tried to answer panic with speed and found itself persuaded by gravity to debate instead. The wagon jerked. A man swore. Another grabbed for a brake.
Rook took 3 long strides into the kind of space violence uses to plant seeds and plucked the reins from the driver's hands before the man could remember that he might shoot. He put his palm on the nearer gelding's neck. "There," he said, voice gone low as if he were speaking to some earlier version of himself. Tolliver managed to look both appalled and impressed. "You can't just—" "Watch me," Rook said. The moment could not last. Moments never do. The men flanking the wagon recovered enough dignity to try to steal someone else's. They pointed pistols as if punctuation could save them. Kestrel moved like a line break that decided to reformat a paragraph. One weapon went into the dust, the other found its aim redirected toward a wheel, where it lodged with a thunk that promised paperwork instead of funeral arrangements. The driver saw his options and chose to protect his face. Eowyn exhaled. "We walk now," she said, "before the story decides it doesn't like this chapter." "Where?" Vesper asked. Eowyn's eyes moved toward the east cut. "Home," she said, and the word didn't point to Gideon's house or the hill. It pointed to the place where your voice went when it wasn't being supervised. "For as long as we can keep holding it." They ran again, the kind of running that asks for longevity. Rook barked an order at men who had watched him do much worse for fewer reasons. Tolliver barked a different one. The 2 sets of barking collided and knocked a little sense into each other. For 800 yards, the world preferred them to the wagon. They reached the creek. The mule considered them and agreed to share his doubt. Eowyn put her hand on the animal's face and spoke a word that was less a word and more the sound a woman makes when she has not said her own name in a while and remembers it tastes like water. "Gideon," Vesper said, because her mouth couldn't contain another thought until the one with his name in it was allowed to walk. Eowyn's mouth bent. "Always," she said, and there it was, the part of her that loved him not as idea, but as daily work. Rook and Tolliver reached the creek and stopped like men at a threshold they did not own. Kestrel turned and put herself between the men and the women with the sort of competence that makes a body feel safer than paper ever has. If you aim, you're admitting you prefer conclusions to the truth. Don't. Rook did not raise a gun. Tolliver did not either. Both drew breath like men who disliked being told anything that could be true about themselves in public. The creek chose this moment to sound like a small choir. Eowyn's hand on Vesper's arm said, "Not yet done." The hill above town glowed faintly with the idea of dawn. Eowyn saw the line where the ground changed its mind about being one kind of jurisdiction and considered being another, and smiled, the smile of a woman who had outlived definitions. "Do you hear it?" she asked Vesper. "Hear what?" Vesper whispered. "The thing that comes before the thing," Eowyn said. "The hinge has another part. You've used the one men can see. There's one more. It isn't for horses." "What is it for?" Vesper asked. Eowyn's eyes went to the men, then to Kestrel, then back to Vesper. "For doors that think they are people." Before Vesper could ask, the air shifted, not with wind, not with train, but with a sound that used to be made by bells and now got made by telegraph wire when you plucked it in just the way a message gets impatient. Marigold's runner appeared, out of breath and grinning like sin forgiven. "Counting how south is burning. Somebody spilled the right lantern in the wrong place. Ledger pages flew." She held up a handful of ash-rimmed paper and laughed. "I caught a few before the law remembered fire doesn't respect signatures." Tolliver closed his eyes. You could almost see the moment he forgave and then rescinded forgiveness from whatever part of him that let the words be beautiful for a second. Rook's jaw went to granite, and then to riverbed, and then to something less easy to name. He looked at Eowyn, and something in his face suggested strangers no longer. He bowed, real, no swagger, once. "We'll talk," he said.
To no one, and to Elowin most of all. Not yet, Elowin said. I'm going to hold my daughters in a kitchen where the floor knows our feet. Then we will talk. Daughters, Tolliver repeated, and the word sounded like a law placing itself on a shelf it wasn't sure it deserved. 2? Elowin smiled and did not answer a man who used answers to hurt people. She touched Kestrel's cheek with 2 fingers, and then Vesper's with her whole hand, greedy and chastened at once, as if a woman were allowed to be both in public. They reached Gideon's yard as the first ordinary rooster in town took it upon himself to be extraordinary. Gideon stood in the doorway with the hammer in his hand, because love had always been a kind of building with him. He didn't blink for a full 10 heartbeats. Then he did, because a man's eyes are not built for that much blessing without moisture. Ellie, he said, small and enormous. Kest, Elowin said, a name that she had made when Kestrel was little enough to like being little, and Kestrel permitted her to say it once in front of these people and never again where it could humiliate her work. Elowin then said, Vesper, as if the name were a bell you ring at the hour you choose. Come in. They went inside. Tolliver stayed on the porch like a rule with its hat in its hands. Rook stayed at the gate like a thief deciding to repent in front of the woman who taught him about theft. Ella moved like a woman who had set an extra place for every meal since the world turned mean, and was not surprised to need it now. The baby Ephraim made a sound from the crook of his mother's arm, and the sound translated nicely into the word living. Elowin set both hands on the table like a map. Not yet done, she said. I left more than a 10 in the ground. I left an echo in a room south of here that men keep for taking voices apart. That room still stands.
Where? Gideon asked, hammer taking its new job as pointer. Elowin's mouth tightened. A chapel with no god, the sanctuary of St. Bray. The name is a joke men tell themselves so they can bear to work there. They call it the choir house. It's a room where they test voices on the wire, teaching the line to listen. Vesper's stomach turned. Wire. Telegraph, Elowin said. They're teaching men with money to send men with guns faster. To do that, they learned to send a note that tells horses to quiet. Then they wondered what else a note can tell men to do. She lifted her eyes. We burn it. Kestrel's hand was already reaching for a hat she had never taken off in her mind. When? Elowin smiled, the way a woman smiles when she is about to tell the truth to people who will carry it without making it smaller. Now, she said, before the men who clean up after fire figure out which fire is from a lamp and which is from a woman who knows how to strike flint. They moved again, because the day refused to be anything but a string tied to another string. Rook watched them go with a face that said a man could grow into someone he wouldn't mind sitting next to at his death. Tolliver watched with the expression of a man writing a gentle law in his head, and then remembering that gentle laws are punished by men who like to show off the sharpness of their pencils. They took the dry creek again. They took the back lots where boys grow into men if the world permits them to. They slipped past the coal house door where Marigold had once changed history with a spark. They found the road where the sanctuary of St. Bray hid itself by pretending to be ordinary. It was not a sanctuary. It was a box with a roof and a steeple, built by a carpenter who'd never built a steeple before, and had decided to make up for his inexperience with height. The door had a cross, not to indicate holiness, but to remind women who entered that men believed they had rights over grace. Elowin pushed it open, and the hinges made a disappointed sound. Inside, the room held machines like pews. Wires hummed in lines. A wheel turned and decided the speed at which a woman's throat should be allowed to learn. A man in a black coat looked up from a notebook and reached for a lever that would have made the wrong thing happen if Elowin's hand hadn't gotten there first and made the right thing happen instead. The lever broke the way a handle does when it realizes it's been helping men make errors. "Out," Elowen told the man. "I have orders," he said, and then a second later, "Yes, ma'am," because he saw what orders look like when a woman brings them. Vesper stood in the middle of the room and tried to hear around the machines. She found the note before it found her. It hadn't been meant for her. It had been meant for a horse, for a line, for a man on the other end of a wire who wanted to stop a crowd with one name said loudly. She set her voice under it and lifted. "Don't make me what you are using me to be," she said to the machines, to the idea, to the men whose money had purchased a sound they intended to rent out to violence. Kestrel yanked wires free and made them resemble the snakes they had always been. Gideon hefted the hammer and gave the room a lesson in how things learned not to be cruel when their handles broke. Elowen moved from wheel to wheel and stilled it with her palm. She pressed her ear to a box and hummed to it like a woman telling a child, "You don't have to grow up into meanness if you don't want to." A bell on the desk rang once, the kind of bell they used when they wanted to pretend that what they were doing was service. Kestrel hit it with her knuckles so it would not embarrass itself further. "Fire?" Kestrel asked. "After," Elowen said. "First, the wire." She put Vesper's hand on a coil. It was warm. It hummed like a nest of insects or a choir in a well. "Say it," Elowen said. "The thing before the thing, the new hinge." Vesper closed her eyes and thought of Wren and the baby and Ella pouring soup and Gideon looking at a ring and Kestrel's laugh and Marigold's hands and Rook holding a horse's face as if apologies had fingers. She thought of the hill and the empty coffin and the little lark carved in the fence and the word "not." She let the breath in her wrap around the wire the way a morning glory wraps a post when nobody's watching. She made the sound she had always made to herself, in rooms where men wanted a show and she wanted a door. The wire trembled, the machines quivered, the room turned its head toward women. The bell on the desk exploded in a fit that was equal parts rage and admiration. In the yard, men shouted, some pointed, some begged for orders. None came in time. "Now fire," Elowen said, and Kestrel obliged. They left before the roof finished its argument. They walked into daylight with ash in their hair and the kind of quiet women make when they have done a right thing that will not be called right by men who like their rightness written down. Tolliver met them at the path with his book, open to a blank page. "Don't," Vesper told him. He shut it. It looked like it hurt him. "I don't know how to be the man you need," he said, "but I might know how to stay out of the way of the women who do." "That's a start," Kestrel said. Rook came from the other direction, soot on his cuffs. He didn't look at the burning that would make somebody's report long and somebody's sermon longer. He looked at Elowen and said, "I'm sorry," without adding anything that could turn the words into a weapon. Elowen nodded. "We're not done," she said. "No," he said, "not yet." He looked at Vesper then, and the note you put into the wire, men will learn to hate that if they understand it. Be careful. "I don't put notes into anything I'm not willing to be responsible for," Vesper said. Rook's mouth made the smallest concession a man can make and still be a man in front of other men. "Then I'll try to be responsible for the parts of me that can help," he said. And Vesper found she had no energy left to hate him in a way that kept the world safe. They reached Gideon's again, with the kind of tired that sits down on the floor and laughs because everything is wrong and you are still alive anyway. Ella put cups into hands, and bread into mouths, and water into basins, and scents into the room when voices rose out of habit. Marigold arrived with a stack of papers the fire had not wanted, and said, "I'm not going to jail today. I have ink to spend." Wren came with her, eyes bright and hands calloused with sudden usefulness. She hugged Elowen with the tightness of a child who understands custody better than a judge. Eowyn hugged back with the careful green of a mother who has been asked to ration her arms and refuses. Only then did Vesper allow herself to sit on the floor with her back to the cabinet where Ella kept flour and secrets. She put her head on her knees and let her body finally be the age it was instead of the age the day had assigned her. Eowyn's hand found Vesper's hair. Kestrel's hand found Eowyn's shoulder. Gideon's hand found Kestrel's back. The chain went around the room and settled like a belt on a loose coat. Outside, the hill kept its own counsel. The cottonwood lifted its single arm into smoke-hazed light and made the kind of shadow that suggests mercy is tall. The empty grave remembered the weight of a coffin lid and felt lighter for being honest about its failure to contain what it had been told to hold. Vesper raised her head last. She did it because a wicker of dread had kept itself safe all morning, and because dread, unlike sorrow, wasn't content until it had regained the floor. She looked at Eowyn. "What did you mean," she asked, "about doors that think they are people?" Eowyn's face changed the way weather does when a front moves through and grandmothers reach for quilts without knowing why. "It's a thing I learned south," she said. "Some men aren't men, they're doors. They swing to let violence in and out. They forget they were meant to be walls." Her eyes slid to Tolliver, who stood on the porch with his hat in his hands as if hats were petitions. "Sometimes a door can be taught to brace. And if it can't," Kestrel asked, "you break it and build a wall."
"Where?" Kestrel demanded. Marigold pointed, finger shaking for the first time Vesper had seen. "At the river bridge. The iron one. If they get that working, the line can tell men across 3 counties to shut their doors and let blood in." Eowyn stood. The move remade the room. She looked at Vesper like a woman offers a knife to another woman without words. "Hinge," she said. Vesper got to her feet. Her legs felt like their own creatures and agreed, grudgingly, to cooperate. "Let's go." Rook and Tolliver turned in the same instant, 2 men with 2 different debts trying to be paid by the same act. Gideon grabbed the hammer because that is what he knew to do when anything needed fixing or harming, in equal measure. They spilled into the yard. The light had gone wrong, the kind of wrong light gets when it has to look at an act it doesn't want to illuminate. At the edge of the field, boys were running. Not Rook's men and not Tolliver's, other boys. Boys with eyes that had been told by their fathers they would be men if they stopped crying at the wrong times. They had wire spools. They had hand cranks. They had orders shouted across county lines by men who thought distance protected them from the weight of their own sentences. At the top of the road, the iron bridge stood, a rib cage over water. Men swarmed it with tools. A wheel spun, a lever waited. A door that thought it was a person lifted its chin. Eowyn took Vesper's hand and squeezed hard enough to hurt. "Listen," she said. "Not to the world. To Vesper. Do not close them. Swing them. Invite them to be useful for once." Vesper got to her feet. Her legs felt like their own creatures and agreed, grudgingly, to cooperate. "Let's go." Rook and Tolliver turned in the same instant, 2 men with 2 different debts trying to be paid by the same act. Gideon grabbed the hammer because that is what he knew to do when anything needed fixing or harming in equal measure. They spilled into the yard. The light had gone wrong, the kind of wrong light gets when it has to look at an act it doesn't want to illuminate. At the edge of the field, boys were running. Not Rook's men and not Tolliver's, other boys. Boys with eyes that had been told by their fathers they would be men if they stopped crying at the wrong times. They had wire spools. They had hand cranks. They had orders shouted across county lines by men who thought distance protected them from the weight of their own sentences. At the top of the road, the iron bridge stood, a rib cage over water. Men swarmed it with tools. A wheel spun. A lever waited. A door that thought it was a person lifted its chin. Eowyn took Vesper's hand and squeezed hard enough to hurt. "Listen," she said. not to the world. To Vesper. Do not close them, swing them, invite them to be useful for once. Vesper nodded and stepped forward. The world tilted, the sky narrowed. The note in her ribs stood up and named itself without shame. She drew breath, not from her mouth, but from every place she had ever kept a quiet to not die. She placed that breath into the hinge she had learned that morning, the new one, the one that wasn't for horses. The door that thought it was a person paused. It had been sure of itself for years. It had opened for men with money and closed on women with names. It had been proud of its polish. Now it felt confused. It swung, not open, not closed, just wrong, which is another word for available to other meanings. The wheel faltered. The wire shrieked as if it had been told it wasn't special. The men on the bridge shouted that someone was interfering with the natural order of commerce. Good, Kestrel said. Let's interfere more. Rook ran at the lever with the hammer high, his body remembering every nail that had ever gone in straight. Rook vaulted the rail and put his shoulder against a gear that had thought itself above such intimacy. Tolliver took the boy's crank and threw it into the river. The boys gasped and then laughed and then ran away because no one had told them not to, and they had wanted to for years. The bridge groaned like a promise breaking. Vesper sang the thin seam that told doors they could be walls and walls they could be something else again. The wire's angry buzz became a whine, and then a tired sigh, and then a silence that sounded like relief, trying not to be punished for existing. Something cracked. It wasn't wood. It wasn't iron. It was a voice. Elowen's hand tightened on Vesper's until bones might have changed their minds. Vesper turned. Elowen's face had gone white in a way that had nothing to do with soot. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. She fell. A tree deciding it was time and giving as much warning as a tree knows how to give. "Ma!" Kestrel said, and the word split her in two. Vesper dropped beside Elowen and found her breath with her hand. It was there. It was not right. It skipped like a girl over a rope she wasn't ready for. Men shouted, the bridge rattled, the wire died, the world tried to make a scene out of itself. Elowen's eyes opened. They found Vesper. The hinge in her throat worked once. Don't stop. Not yet done. Her eyes rolled back. From the far side of the bridge, a man's voice rose, the kind of voice you hate because it knows how to make crowds junk. "Hold them," it commanded, and the word held. Rook turned. Tolliver turned. Gideon turned with a hammer up. Vesper didn't turn. She lifted her mouth and aimed the new hinge at the crowd. It hit like a wind changes a fire. Men went still, not because a woman told them to, but because a door remembered how to brace. And in that breath between orders and motion, between men and the things they build to excuse themselves, a rifle cracked from the tree line. One shot, professional as a signature. The ball took the mule in the chest. The animal screamed, and Vesper's voice broke with him. The world chose a side. Everything moved.
Pick. The word hung in Vesper's skull like a nail without a board, ringing the edges of her hearing while every gaze in the road climbed the hill. The cottonwood's one lifted arm shivered. Dust licked the fence. Inside the little square where Elowen Hart's marker kept watch, the earth had made a decision and then thought better of declaring it. But something had shifted. Vesper had not imagined that. Her bones would not let her lie to herself about vibrations. A second shot cracked, higher, the light sound of a rifle that had been cleaned by hands that liked work. A man to Rook's right jerked and grabbed for a hat that wasn't there. His ear went red and then darker.
"Hold!" Rook barked, not to the horse this time, but to the instinct that rippled through his men's shoulders. Most gunfighters' hands leap before their heads. Rook's order put a palm on that leap and pressed it down. Gideon did not step over the line. He planted his boots into the east side loam and made a wall with the way he stood. Ella didn't move either, though her mind was already counting how many clean rags she had left. Sheriff Tolliver Rake slid his book from beneath his arm with ceremony, as if a page might catch the bullet for him. "Who's shooting on a Sabbath?" he called, though the day wasn't yet Sunday. Tolliver preferred accusations with edges. A figure resolved at the crest of the hill, thin against the cottonwood, hat pulled low, rifle balanced like a talking stick across a shoulder. The person came down the slope without hurry, as if the hill had decided to carry them part way. Something about the stride, loose, decisive, a refusal to show the wobble pain gives, made Vesper's ribs tighten. The mule at the heart rail raised his head. He recognized the kind of motion that promised to make the morning longer. The stranger reached the fence without touching it, as if the rails parted out of respect. Closer, Vesper saw a woman, not old but with the face of someone whose mirrors were rivers and tin pans. She wore a coat the color of storm shadows and a kerchief the color of old berries. A lark feather lay at her throat, tucked into a loop of leather. The sight of it put the first wrong foot in Vesper's breath. "Who claims this ground?" the woman asked, not loud, but with the gravity of a woman who had taught silence where shouting had failed. Gideon's voice came rough. "I do." "Who claims the song?" the woman asked then, and her eyes went to Vesper as if a string between them had tugged. Vesper's mouth was dry. "I don't claim it. I keep it." The woman's gaze took that in and laid it alongside other truths. "Then stop letting men with ledger tongues decide its price," she said. She slid her rifle to the crook of her arm and came the last few yards into the open where all the bad intentions could see her clearly. Rook let his horse take a half step, as if the stallion could get a better angle on the woman's face. "Name?" he asked, polite because her shot had drawn blood without killing, and men respect that neatness even when they hate it. "Kestrel Rowe," she said. Rook's mouth twitched. "Bird names for bird work. The world named me first. I've been catching mice men leave behind since I was 12. She nodded at the man holding his ear. "That was a mouse. The next one gets teeth." Sheriff Tolliver tilted his head. He liked when women arrived with their own law. It made his look necessary. "You shot toward a lawful assembly," he said amiably, as if he were reading a recipe. "Then write warning, and you were told." Kestrel looked over the circle, weighing, discarding. Her eyes landed on Vesper again and refused to leave. "Your hinge is clean," she said, and there was something like hunger under the compliment, the kind that wants a meal to be sacred for once. Vesper found the edge of the porch with her heel so she would not step backward without meaning it. Kestrel wore her lark feather high and loose, not stitched tight like Vesper's. More talisman, more flag. In another life, Vesper would have taken this woman for a map she did not have to read, just follow. In this life, the woman's arrival had a shape that pulled trouble like iron to a creek magnet. "You're proud of kneeling a horse," Kestrel said, not accusing, just measuring. "But that stallion didn't kneel to you. It knelt to what's under you, same as all of us. Don't mistake the road for the town." Rook shifted in the saddle. His eyes had done a thing Vesper couldn't name when she said Elowin 1 hour ago. They did it again when Kestrel spoke. "You know this trick, then. You can make animals prefer the dirt." Kestrel's mouth quirked. "Animals already prefer the dirt. We just forget. I remind." Her glance brushed Vesper's bruises and came back like a hand finding a familiar pulse. Who did that? Vesper held Rook in her peripheral like a knife you know is there. Men south of Trinidad started it. Men on this road took a ton. Kestrel took that into her chest and let it move her shoulders. "Then sing later, not for them," she said softly. "Enough sermons," Tolliver said, his cheeriness tightening. "State your business, Miss Rowe, and be about it." Kestrel put 2 fingers on the top rail of Elowin's fence the way a woman touches a chair back before she sits in a house for the first time. "Elowin Hart was my mother," she said, and every face took on the same expression town faces get when lightning chooses a tree they've known since they were small. The air thinned. Vesper's heartbeat and the stallion's heartbeat fell out of time with each other. Kestrel did not blink for 3 full breaths, and when she did, it was slow, like you close a door when you know someone is sleeping on the other side. Gideon's hand went around nothing. For a moment he was a man trying to catch a thing that had fallen off a cart going downhill. Elowen Hart had no daughter, he said. His voice was not the kind that makes a man look taller. It was the kind that keeps a family from breaking dishes to hear themselves speak. Kestrel's eyes moved to his mouth, then to his hands, then to the hill. She had the look of someone who could tell if a gate had been opened by a person or by a wind. A woman's life is bigger on the parts men don't watch. I'm here to tell the ground a thing. Vesper tasted copper again. It had a different flavor when it arrived with jealousy. What thing? She asked, unable to stop her tongue from being less brave than the rest of her face. That I found my way back, and the last word made the mule's ear twitch. He liked the sound of return, because he had no use for departure. Rook exhaled through his nose, a man who'd been handed a fresh deck in the middle of a game and could already see 3 ways to win ugly. All right, we'll take all the birds, the quiet one, the hinge one, the one who thinks she knows the ground. Sheriff, you get your order, and I get my quiet. Balance. Tolliver lifted the book to his chest. Now that's almost poetry, he said. Bring them. Gideon stepped and stopped. He had iron in him, just not enough for 12 men and a law with a smile. He looked at Vesper the way a person looks at water they cannot reach with their hands. He looked at Kestrel as if her name meant both shelter and storm. Kestrel moved first. She slid inside the crescent as if it were badly built and offered gaps if you knew where to press. A man reached for her elbow. He ended up holding air and a painful memory. Kestrel's rifle swung in her arm without ever pointing at a stomach. She didn't make new holes when old holes were busy screaming.